Chapter 2. Practicing Islam. Nominalism. In the not-so-distant past, the religious climate of Iran separated religion and politics, and people were encouraged to become religious nominalists. The last king of Iran, Mohammad Reza Shah, influenced by his father, understood that Persians would not survive if they did not distance their political philosophy from the rigid authoritarianism of Islam. History has proven that the Shah's reign over Persia was a pinnacle of freedom in comparison to other Muslim kingdoms since the dominance of Islam. The Shah was wise to the fact that Islam is a political religion which desires to dominate every aspect of the lives of its followers, both political and private. He claimed to be a good Muslim, but in his practical life he distanced himself from Islam and from many religious leaders and showed a more pro-Western attitude. The power of Islam makes it virtually impossible for Muslims to distance themselves from the politico-religious influence of Islam. Muslims are expected to surrender even the most mundane aspects of their lives, and resistance is costly. Prior to the 1979 revolution, religious fundamentalism was not present in northern Iran. People readily called themselves Muslims, but did not practice according to Islamic expectations. Some Islamic holy days were observed by some, but most were accustomed to nationalism. They were more inclined to recognize national holidays than religious ones. The popular confession of the majority of people around the Caspian Sea was God, King, and the Motherland. Even after the revolution, when I helped other revolutionaries deliver food and household necessities to needy families, many recipients expressed their gratitude by exclaiming, "Long live the King!" We had made it known that the gifts were from the religious leaders or the mullahs, but they refused to accept that anyone but the Shah was providing for them. They knew that the king had been deposed and had fled the country, but they insisted that the Shah had left these gifts for his countrymen. The idea of a government being generous was unfathomable. Only kings were generous. We did not deal harshly with citizens who denied the benevolence of the new government because the theocracy of Islam had not yet fully taken hold in Iran. Taleshis were unwilling to accept the idea of Iran without a king. The royal heritage of Persia is ancient and dates back thousands of years. It is a great source of pride for Iranians, evidenced even today in their reverence for King Cyrus and King Darius. Even the most brutal Saudi Arabian invaders could not establish the demands of their prophet Muhammad by erasing the kingdom mindset of Iranians. Iranians, excluding Islamic zealots, would love to return to the days of glory which they associate with the reign of Persian kings 2,500 years ago, and thereby regain their nation's honor. Raising Muslims. Taleshi children were supposed to follow the faith of their father, so I submerged myself in religious activities. I sang lamentations in mosques with a mournful voice, leading people to mourn and weep for ancient Shiite Arabian martyrs. I do not know why I chose to follow my mother's sect, Shia, rather than my father's, Sunni, because I, like my parents, didn't know the difference between the two. Perhaps it was because my father was not interested in practicing religion as outwardly as my mother. I suppose I was drawn by my mother's religiosity and less interested in my father's indifference to religion. My father's interest in Islam was strictly limited to whatever might gain him honor among his peers, which is the case with many other Muslim parents. A child who could recite the Quran as I could is revered by both Sunnis and Shiites. It was for this reason that, although I did not follow my father's religious sect, he never discouraged me. It was very much to his advantage to be the father of the most religious child in our village. Taleshi parents are not all devout Muslims, but are enslaved by doctrines causing them to desire religious children. Muslims have been taught that all righteous and unrighteous Muslims will be gathered around hell first, and if their good deeds outweigh their bad deeds, they are taken to paradise by Allah. Muslims consider that Allah looks favorably upon prayers for the dead. The deceased person for whom prayers in the Quran are recited finds favor in Allah's sight and may gain entry to the bliss of paradise. My parents encouraged this philosophy from the time that I could read and recite the Quran in Arabic. This created a deep desire in me for religious matters, even though I did not understand Arabic. My ability to memorize the Quran and recite it in religious gatherings made me famous at a young age. I was strongly attached to the mosques in the area. people revered my religious zeal. Islam, I was aware, aimed to first rid the world of all other religions, but I did not know how this would happen. Our religious exercises at that time were a bit different from what is now practiced under the rule of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We were Muslims by name, but Zoroastrians, the religion of Persia before Islam, in practice. We were not conscious of the fact, however. Zoroastrianism does not believe in imposing religion on others and does not believe in evangelism. A Zoroastrian believes that an individual will find his way to Zoroastrianism by building his life on good thoughts, words, and deeds, and especially through doing good deeds for others. It is like all other man-made religions based on works rather than on the wonderful, unmerited grace given by Jesus Christ. I believe that my zealous religious practices would increase my ability to rely on God, and I hope to receive from Allah all the strength needed to reach my spiritual and worldly goals. All I knew of Islam was superstition, ceremony, and traditional daily practices. Knowing such things made me good enough to be called a religious person in the eyes of non-practicing Muslims. In reality, however, they were hollow and meaningless because I was never connected to the one true God by any of these outward acts of self-righteousness. I had to pray 5 times a day in Arabic. One must not pray to Allah in one's mother tongue. Allah will only accept prayers in Arabic, the words which Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, determined for Muslims to recite 5 times a day. Most Taleshi villagers could not pray in Arabic, but this is the only way a person was allowed to stand for prayer in Islam. Many people still did not know how to pray after 1,300 years of Islamic rule in Iran and the pressure of Muslim leaders on Iranians to learn Arabic. This had a great deal to do with the fact that our Taleshi forefathers were very disinterested in Islam. This legacy remains true even today. God hears. For Taleshis, the most practical way of talking to God has always been through sighs and groans expressed in the native language. These expressions to God stem from their deep spiritual longings that cannot be uttered in words. This type of prayer is unconvincing to Allah, the God of Islam, who ignores other languages. However, these heartfelt prayers had a great impact on me. They were the natural cries of the heart, and Taleshis knew God could not ignore deep crying from one's soul. Taleshi prayers were in starkly contrast to Islam's rituals. It is no surprise to me that Taleshis would not prefer the cold, meaningless redundancy of Muslim prayers to the cries of the soul to a God who has compassion for tears and contrite hearts. By the age of 9, I had learned the Islamic prayers and was able to pray in Arabic. However, the soulful sighs and groans of the prayers of people in their own language seemed to be more poetic, touching, and attractive. This led me to be interested in the aesthetic aspect of spiritual life practiced by some of my fellow citizens. I fell in love with traditional Persian ascetic poetry, the desires of a simple life that is focused overridingly on discovering God in this world, to know and to be known personally by God, and to be absorbed in Him. I believe this is a testimony that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has left among Iranians in order to lead them to Jesus Christ. I think back now and remember that some of my most lucid moments of meditation with God came when I was doing my schoolwork under the trees in my father's orchard. My mind was always working out ways in which I could attain my personal goals for financial and educational success. Because my family's financial situation was always uncertain, it seemed to me that my goals were unattainable. This caused me to rely on God more and more, seeking His supernatural intervention in my life. There in my father's orchard, I would express my needs and the deepest desires through the sighs and groans of my soul, much like those prayerful expressions I share with the Lord Jesus today. It's interesting to me that what my culture taught me as a child, which I later discarded as a Muslim, has come full circle in my life as my gracious Heavenly Father works through me in prayer. Though I had no knowledge of God, those moments with Him convinced me that God was good and all good things were His attributes and must have come from Him. Ignorance isn't bliss. As a Muslim, I was taught that in order to attract God's attention, we must read the Quran in Arabic, even though we could not understand what we were reading. I neither knew the meaning of the verses of the Quran nor anything about Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, or his successors. My parents had no knowledge of Islam. They blindly inherited their beliefs from their forefathers who had been forced to follow Islam. Our parents were expected to pass the legacy of Islam to their children for future generations, and no one was allowed to question that legacy. To be a Sunni or a Shiite had become nothing more than a family tradition rather than a religion of choice. Fortunately, people from both sects in Talesh enjoyed peaceful relationships with each other. Prior to the Islamic Revolution, I had never experienced any religious fighting among the followers of these two sects in my hometown. It was not until after the 1979 revolution that religious beliefs among Taleshis took on a political character, and Shiite leaders, becoming proud of their majority status, began to discriminate against the Sunni minority. Since childhood, we had continually heard verses from the Quran translated into Persian, which stated that Jews and Christians were unclean. It was common to humiliate someone during an argument by calling that person the son of a Jew or a Christian. This was also the attitude of radical Muslim leaders who spread this hatred among the people. They desired to prepare an atmosphere for discrimination and ethnic and religious cleansing. To the shame of Iranians and the cultural tolerance inherited from the ancient kings Cyrus and Darius, this attitude of discrimination is now widespread throughout all of Iran. The war between the Persian culture and Islam has dominated Iran since the invasion and occupation of Arabian Muslims in 633 through 656 AD. There were many times throughout history when the struggle for power between Persia and Islam illustrated the strength of one over the other. However, Iranians were never able to completely rid themselves of the Saudis' hostile culture because of their fearful and sometimes blind obedience to Islam. Belief systems are the strongest and most influential factors that shape the values of a culture. Iranians once tolerated all beliefs. Now it's hard for them to believe that an Iranian can be a Jew or a Christian or a Zoroastrian, or indeed any other religion. I never knew anything about Christianity, Judaism, or any religions beyond Islam and Zoroastrianism, because Islamic religious leaders teach that Islam is the final and perfect religion brought to finish the work of God on earth. It was not for us to question whether a religion or idea could be superior to Islam, so there was no need to read about any other belief system. The call of a Muslim is one of blind obedience. Death is the penalty for believing the superiority of any other book over the Quran. Islam teaches that no one is able to understand the words of a transcendent Allah, and for an ignorant mortal to presume to compare the words of Allah to another religion is an affront to Islam and worthy of the wrath of man and Allah. Iranian poets concur. I certainly did not know many things about Jesus Christ. All I ever heard from clerics about Jesus was that he was a good prophet, but for the Jews only. From a purely political standpoint, committed Muslims believe that Jesus' success was impeded because of his apparent inability to compel the entire nation of Israel to follow him. Also, they believe Muhammad was sent after Jesus to establish Islam and finish the work Jesus left incomplete. However, this is not the view commonly held by Persian poets, many of whom wrote of a relationship with Jesus Christ. Maulana Rumi, a 13th century AD philosopher and poet, said, "Die to self at the feet of Jesus, as I died to myself fully." Hafiz, another 14th century AD great Iranian lyric poet, said, "The load of pain that was torturing us, God sent Jesus to us to rid us of this pain, and took him back again." Sadi, another 13th century AD poet, quoted the words of the Gospel of Christ in a poem saying, "If the world tortures one member of a body, there will not be peace in any other members of the body." Their personal philosophies correspond remarkably to Christ's teachings, the Gospel of Christ, and Christianity. I became very much interested in Persian poetry from 9th grade and involved myself in writing my own poems and reciting the poems of others. I discovered the humble approaches of these great poets to Jesus Christ and was amazed. I was not able to ask why they did not speak about Muhammad in a similar manner. I believe the writings of these men are a testimony of God's plan for Iranians. He allowed the name of Christ to be magnified in Persian poetry so that Iranians like me might see the excellence of Christ without first opening the Bible. By reading the Bible, they would be amazed on how God paved the ground for them to unite with him. Childhood prophecy. One day, in 7th grade, our teacher dismissed us for an hour onto the playground for recess. 7 boys, including myself, got together wondering what to play. One of the boys said he knew a game. He tore a piece of paper from his notebook and divided it into 7 pieces. He then proceeded to write something on each piece of paper without showing it to us. Folded up each piece of paper into a tiny square and mixed them up and said, "Each person must take only one ballot and open it in turn. Each ballot will show the future of the person who carries it." After we each took a ballot, we playfully and excitedly argued about who would open their ballot first. I was the 7th and last boy to open his ballot. What was written on each ballot referred to various kinds of worldly jobs or positions, such as a teacher, an army officer, a mayor, a doctor, or an engineer. I held the last ballot unopened in my hands, obviously not knowing its content. Like the other students, I was having fun trying to guess what my future would hold. Expecting my ballot to hold some noble prophecy, I opened it, and all at once my light-hearted expectations were shattered. It said, "You will become a Christian in the future." The words on the ballot were a shocking blow. All of the boys burst into laughter, mocking and teasing me. Suddenly I became strangely paranoid, thinking that this boy must be my enemy. The humiliation was unbearable because I was a religious Muslim. I felt as though I was being accused of something terrible. Christians were unheard of in our school and region. The pressure of the moment was tremendous. I felt trapped and threatened. I thought to myself, how dare someone call me a Christian? My thoughts turned to violence and revenge. I was angry and wanted to kill the boy who wrote the ballots. I began beating him and shouting, "Why did you write such a disgusting thing for me?" As I continued to beat my classmate, he cried out in terror and fear and tried desperately to shield himself from the blows laid on him. He cried, "I did not write it for you, and the others saw that I folded the ballots very well, mixed them in front of your eyes, and no one was able to distinguish them from each other or who was going to take which ballot. I swear to God that I did not know who was going to take it. I could have picked it. We were just playing a game. No other student put it in your hand. We all picked ours before you, and you were the last one with the last ballot. You have no right to blame me." I realized that he was right. I had taken the ballot myself, and I had fought for the right to be the last boy to take the final ballot. I stopped beating my classmate, but my anger and embarrassment forced me to leave the group. I retreated to a quiet place in a corner, crying out to God and demanding to know why He would allow such a thing to happen to me. While groaning, I also asked myself a question. Why is it so hard for a Muslim to become a follower of Jesus Christ? If it was not, then I would have fun in playing with my friends, but not grief. 20 years later, after my walk with Christ began, I still remembered that game and realized it was not my classmate or Allah who caused me so much personal grief. It was the real God who had allowed that incident to occur. God demonstrated His providence through that incident in my life. I realized His plan for me had been laid out and that no one was able to demolish it. I believe He was leaving a trail of memories for me to look back on and ponder, to soften my heart and to reconcile me to Him. Through no worth of my own, God had reached into my life from eternity and left tokens of His grace so that I might become a trophy of His grace. Searching for God. It was 9th grade when I found my interest in Persian poetry. I had an interest in classical poems which taught a kind of ascetic philosophy called irfan. Some Iranian poets encourage meditation on the original condition of man's relationship with God prior to his fall. This method of exploring thoughts and feelings through a simple lifestyle was meant to bring man closer to God. The irfan encourages a life of deprivation and isolation, and encourages a critical mindset towards secular and religious leaders who promote religiosity and hypocrisy. The irfan encourages people to attain a life of purity and love. It also condemns the killing of all life forms, even an ant. Some poets describe the cause of humanity's despair as having been brought about by man's separation from God. This is the cause of all suffering and pain. In Iran, people esteem such poets as those who are able to reach God because they have preferred a simple life. The reason that Jesus is revered in Iranian poetic culture is because of His simplicity and His sacrificial love. Jesus Christ has served as the greatest of all models of inspiration of this ascetic style of poetry. Why? He did not own anything, not even a pillow, while He was in this world. This embodies humility and unconditional love in its purest form. This is yet another example of how God has left His witness in the culture of those who were not searching for Him. God allowed Himself to be found by those who had not heard His gospel and yet, through cultural means, Persians were able to see the beauty and value of Christ through their poetry. As a young man, I loved the simplicity of these poets' lives. I wished to be wise and lead a simple life as they did. I desired to be unaffected by the pain, heartache, and struggles of life. Of course, as I have continued my walk with Christ, I see that asceticism and isolation are not the answers, that the pain and suffering I endure with Christ make me more like Him in respecting and loving others. Deep in my heart, I longed to leave the confines of my surroundings and travel across the world. I wanted to know God in the context of the world. Somehow, I imagined that as my horizons expanded, so would the simplicity and purity of my relationship with God. I wanted to enroll in a different high school where I could major in Persian literature and poetry, paving the ground in myself for more investigation in the future and establishing myself as a noble spiritual man in Irfan. My family's financial constraints prevented me from making such a move. Ultimately, I limited myself to desires of reaching out into the world and discovering the spirituality that I felt I had lost somewhere. It was a very vague thing that I was searching for, something tangible which I could not flesh out in my thoughts. Of course, I had no clue that I was going to find the way. It wasn't going to come to me as I imagined it would. My family life, along with its particular struggles, did not allow me any extra time to pursue Irfan or to study the lives and philosophies of the ancient poets in any depth. Everyone in my family except my father was busy working hard just to survive. I was very concerned that the harshness of my reality would force me to quit school, so I worked even harder to make money for the sake of paying tuition and supplies. As I was struggling to make ends meet, the desire to pursue Irfan was growing stronger. I see now that the difficulties and struggles of my life were a complement to the lifestyle of self-denial that was the mark of Irfan. One can learn many lessons from a harsh life. In my spare time, I spent countless nights staring at heaven and expressing my heart to a God that I did not yet know. I hope to one day experience what I instinctively knew would be peace through the knowledge of God in my heart. I did not yet have enough knowledge of Islam to be able to understand whether the desires of my heart were in line with Islam's doctrine, but I was thinking in my heart that I could go to God, that I could reach Him if I tried hard. I didn't know that my sin created a wall between me and God and separated me from Him. Nor did I know that I was unable to bring this wall down and reach God. Only God could shatter this wall and reach me. All of my understanding of God was what my imagination had concocted. I thought that if I tried my best, He would help me to reach to Him. Of course, any time I thought about barriers, I felt helpless. I lifted my eyes and heart to heaven, seeking help from the Creator whose name was still unknown to me. Throughout my life since 9th grade and until I believed in Jesus Christ, I experienced a never-changing dream. I was flying through the sky, and an unknown voice always warned me, "Do not look down to earth, look at heaven always, or you will fall and die." In my dream, if I did look down, it was a horrifying experience. I would begin dropping to earth like a stone faster and faster until I reached a terrifying speed that finally woke me up. When I dreamt again, sometimes I remembered the consequences of looking down. I was obedient to that voice and kept my face toward heaven and enjoyed that peace of flying. Years later, in the early days of my Christian life in Turkey, the words of the voice in my dream presented itself in a Turkish Christian. Yara bakan dushar, guga bakan yashar, which means, anyone who looks at earth will fall down, but the one who looks at heaven will live. He recited this Turkish poetic wisdom to me when he heard about the bitterness in my life. I was shocked and amazed. He shook his head in opposition to the unfriendly approaches of this world. With amazement, I asked him, "What does this poem mean?" He responded, "The prince of this world is Satan, but the prince of heaven is Jesus Christ. If we put our trust in Him who is in heaven, we will not fall into the chains of Satan." His words made me wonder for years whether there was a supernatural mouth speaking to me. I found that my dream was fulfilled by the intervention of Jesus Christ in my life. Those who fix their eyes on heavenly things will soar with Christ as eagles, but those who cast their eyes upon the earth and its desires will fall and die eternally.